Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second installment of our monthly interview series, Conversations with Bill. I'm Tomer Sharon, a proud graduate of the MSHFID program at Bentley University. In this second installment, we'll be talking with Bill about his teaching philosophy. This series is dedicated to capturing Bill's incredible legacy before his retirement. Each month, a different HFID advisory board member from the program will sit down with Bill to discuss specific topics related to his journey and his immense impact on the field of human factors and information design. Our goal is to create short, bite-sized content that provides deep insights and reflections from Bill. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today.
Very good, and thank you for doing this.
One
And
moment.
you
Could you try again?
Siri's decided to.
Oh,
we'll cut that off. Yeah, computers.
not the first time that's happened. And thank you for doing this, Tomer. And I think your greatest challenge is getting me to keep anything bite-sized. So
yeah.
I'll throw down that challenge. But I look forward to this, and it's funny when you shared the question, my philosophy. I don't want to leave you with the impression that I don't think about my teaching, but I never really think about it as a particular philosophy. It is something that it has developed over, many decades, and I'm happy to chat about that.
All right, let's try and map it. So I remember, I don't know if you remember, but I remember asking you once why your courses are so demanding. And you told me, and that stuck with me for years, that making them hard for people will ensure that the program graduates will remember what they learned for many years to come. I know it worked for me. So the first question I wanted to ask you is, when you think about your teaching approach, what are the top three kind of principles that you follow?
Yeah, there's a lot in that in terms of things being difficult, and it's not just despite rumors that run around just to make people's lives miserable and to inflict pain and suffering onto folks. This part is done very, very deliberately. And if I were to tease it out and pull it apart, there's a lot in that question. One, and I've done a better job, I think, in more recent years explaining this to people. I think it always bothered me early on when people would say, like, "Oh, I love the course, but I hated those papers," and they focus just on papers, and I'm going like, "Oh, I was assuming everybody got what was going on here in this writing exercise and challenge." But it was just reduced to a very difficult, time-consuming paper. So I've spent more time in more recent years, and that was my fault. I spent more time in recent years explaining to people why that is the case in terms of the challenge that they face with these. But first of all, it's just building expertise. As I interview people coming into the program, I think probably for every person, I always tell them, my goal is for our graduates to always be, and it's for all of our faculty as well. So this is not just Bill. This is all of our faculty. We want our students and our graduates to be the smartest person in the room. And that's a very kind of simple, accessible way of describing it. But we want you to be experts and expertise, and then this is where we can get into kind of the human factors and the behavioral sciences. We've all heard, and there's disputes about what the number is, but where it takes, thousands of hours of engagement to truly develop, expertise. And that is, again, implanting those patterns, that information, that ability in your mind in such a way that it's readily accessible, it's very predictable, and it's very consistent. So, well, I think some people will claim that they spend thousands of hours in my class. Probably not, but definitely hundreds of hours. So it's the beginning, that journey of building that expertise. So that's number one, is just the engagement with a lot of very difficult material and getting it to the level, not just, spitting it back onto an exam, but truly understanding human behavior. And then being able to apply it to, research and testing and design. So not only, and I guess this is the second stage as I tease it apart. One is building that expertise, and the second thing is the application. The thing I hear a lot as well from students is, oh, just give me a design case and I'll analyze it for you. And I very deliberately, again, and this is, again, if I have a philosophy, this is part of my philosophy, is I want you to be able to say, okay, we're discussing a particular or considering a particular behavior. Where is there an appropriate case where this behavior is in play, and not only in play, but in play in a significant fashion? And I think this is a problem in the field, is oftentimes we're focusing on unimportant things or silly things or things that don't deliver value. So again, that was one of my goals and outcomes, is by, really, agonizing over selecting that case. And some people will say, I spend 10, 12, 14, 15 hours, doing that. And I've wasted a lot of time, and I'm going like, oh, you're not wasting time. That is part of that building, building that and developing that critical eye, that you can look at that case and say, this behavior is in play or not. And if it's in play, is it in play in a significant fashion? So that ability to develop that critical eye, so that theory just doesn't, stay in your head, but it can be applied, to the analysis. And we could just as easily look at, a research study and say, okay, here are the findings. Now, why were people behaving this way? Why were they saying this? Why were they having this problem or that problem? Is to be able to do that analysis. So it's not just design. It's evaluating design, and, the case of what we call an expert review, but also looking at your research findings. I've always said, and some people will really, and you probably will throw something at me if you could, teaching somebody to conduct an interview or a usability test, or an observational study, doing it in an objective, unbiased way. I don't want to say it was easy, but that is the easier part. The hard part is explaining why. Is why am I hearing, seeing, observing what I'm observing? Experiencing with this, with this subject, with this user. And if it's a positive thing, why is it a positive thing? Again, making that connection to the behavior. And if it's a negative thing, okay, where did the design violate or create an obstacle or create a barrier? And then lastly, how do I correct that? How do I make that recommendation? That's the hard part. And again, it comes back to, why is this hard? It's not easy. And we should be thankful that it's not easy, because if it was easy, and I think we're at a critical point in the history of this field right now. If it was easy, it'd be an algorithm, right. and we're done. We're done. Close up shop and go home. The fact that this analysis is difficult, I've learned never to say AI can't do something, but this is going to be the last thing that it's going to be able to take on. This kind of deep analysis, in terms of moving from an observation to explaining why, and then making a recommendation. That is hard. So I'm not making it unnecessarily hard. I think I'm reflecting the challenge of developing expertise. I have one more component, but I want to give you an opportunity, if you want to stop me, to kind of probe if you'd like.
I just wanted to say that why part, I've seen that throughout my career. Is the difference between people who went through, an academic program that demanded from them that line of thinking, and people who completed courses. Because if you complete just a course, and I've seen that, people are very good at describing in their so-called analysis what happened. 3 out of 5 did this, 4 out of 6 did that, and they said this and they said that, but then they can't get to the why. And,
the why.
And I've seen people who are more deep thinkers based on that, based on what they learned. They're able to explain why, and they get, they buy the room. The room is with them once.
And
they know how to explain the behavior.
And if you can't get to the why, then you're not going to get to the recommendation. So then what you'll see people is, through trial and error, they have correctly identified a problem. But then through trial and error and A/B testing, or whatever the case happens to be, they try to get to a solution. Whereas that smarter person can say, this was the problem, this is why, and this is how you correct it. and with
Yeah.
confidence, and again, that is difficult, that is challenging. And I always share with students is, I'll start it next week as I start the next section of 700. I'll say, look, we're students here together. After I've been doing this for 45 years, and longer if you consider graduate school. So I've been doing this a long time, and I'm still a student of human behavior. You'll never master this. I mean, there are things that I still take on that I find hard and difficult and challenging. So this is just the beginning, and again, it keeps coming back to it. It is all about building true expertise. We throw that term expert around a lot today, and it's lost all meaning and value. But truly building expertise takes time. It takes those thousands of hours. It takes those decades of practice and correction. And I've been very fortunate to be in a classroom with really, really smart students that are sometimes that frighten me. Sometimes they're so smart, and they'll ask questions. And I'm sure I'll see it this fall where somebody will ask a question, and I'm going like, my God, after again, for the graduate classes that I've been teaching, for 25 years in literally hundreds, if more than 1,000 students. I'm amazed that questions haven't been asked, that I'll face a question for the first time and I'll have to say, I don't have the answer. But I'll go home and try to figure it out. But again, this is why it's hard. It is a never ending journey. And I would say the last component of it is the writing component. And this is getting interesting. So, a couple of years back, I had to agonize over, am I going to allow, you hear all of the, the pros for, why you should allow people to use AI and to assist them in their writing. But, writing is a vehicle. It is a vehicle to deep learning, again, where I know people struggle with it and I know they spend, maybe 10, 15 hours editing that final draft. And some see it as a waste of time, but it's not. It's really, again, making those connections, making those effective transitions, thinking about the sequencing in terms of how to present this in such a way that the reader understands this with great clarity. That is hard. That is, again, another component of the hard. So I don't want to lose sight of your question. That's the other component of the hard. But it's not, I think sometimes folks lose sight of the fact that by wrestling with that hard and overcoming that hard, they are deepening their learning. And again, at the end of the day, all of this is analysis. And so it's analysis when they're examining and doing these expert reviews in 700. And it's going to be analysis when they're out on the job. And that is challenging. It's one of the most, complex things that we do cognitively.
Yep. All right. So you mentioned 45 years you've been doing that. What has changed in your philosophy over time?
It's interesting. The students, I think again, I've always got to be careful here, not because particularly you, I'll offend you. Because of the reputation of the program that the early graduates built, we just keep attracting, I don't want to say better and better students, but just incredibly frighteningly smart students, and coming from more diverse fields of cognitive science and neuroscience. So I'm seeing a lot more diversity in terms of, folks who are coming in, cultural anthropology and things like that. So they're coming in with, again, with deep understanding of certain areas that, again, I only know, in a shallow area. So I think that is one big change. I think the writing part of it is more challenging with each passing year, is that I think academia has given, and I don't mean just at the university level and graduate level, I think it starts in the primary school level. They've given up on writing. And I think this is what frightens me about, again, all you hear is the positive side of, let AI do it and remove the drudgery from the writing process, and everybody can be a good writer because of the tool. And they're losing sight of the fact that, again, as I just said, there's deep learning and there's deep understanding that comes from grappling with writing and putting the effort. And so again, when I first saw your question, I'm going, and I really focused in on that word hard, and I'm going like, ooh, but that was a nice way of framing it, because again, there is a definite correlation, and this is again from the behavioral sciences, is a very strong correlation between the effort that you put into something and what you take away from that activity. And yes, we can make people's lives more pleasant and easier, and writing, everybody can be a great writer with the assistance of these new technologies. But again, what are they losing in the process? And I think we've lost that part of the conversation. The other thing, and this is probably a bigger question, a bigger answer than maybe what you wanted, but I am thrilled. And again, it's not that people weren't thinking about this 10, 15, 20 years ago. But I see each new class of students that come in, I think they recognize, and I'll just point the finger to me, and that way we won't offend anybody. I'll point the finger to me. We weren't thinking fully and carefully about the consequences of what we were doing. And I find the group that's coming along today, they've seen the mess that we've created. My generation of designers created in tech, and they want no part of it. So I think they are much more challenging about the ethical components, only because they've lived through. Again, this generation, I think of my first classes, that came into the program, it was a long time before social media came along.
Right.
And again, the biggest challenge that, we were facing back in, late 90s and the early 2000s was, how do we make a website, a little stickier? So somebody lingers for another 10 seconds and there's an additional purchase that is made. And I could live with that. Sticky seemed okay. I mean, it was, kind of, a balance between, the corporate goals and the user's goals as a consumer. And I thought it was reasonable, but, before long, sticky became addictive and we weren't aware of it, and we should have been. Yeah. So, again, and I hold myself accountable for that as well. And I've made corrections in my teaching around that, where, the first class in 700 now, I'm saying, look, you're learning how to, create human-centered design in this class to improve and enrich people's lives and so on and so forth. But this can just be flipped, and it can be used to evil ends, to manipulate people, right, to get people to do things that are not in their best interest, but think they are. So all of this can be used both in a very positive way, and it can be used in an extremely negative way. And by studying this, you're assuming an awesome responsibility to do this ethically. And the good news is, and it's not that early students were not ethical, and I want to be very clear on that. It's just that we weren't, we saw ourselves just cleaning up unusable technology, which most of us did for the first 20, 25 years, making things usable and learnable and all of that. But again, with progress, and I think this is your question, is what has changed? Is, we've cleaned, not that we've cleaned it up completely, but we've cleaned up a lot of that easy stuff. And the stuff that we're dealing now, in terms about accessible design and ethical design and inclusive design, all of that, this is exciting. First of all, it's incredibly exciting, but it's also very challenging.
Yeah. When I talk about these things with people, I use this. I say we need to do the right thing, not just things right.
Yeah.
So it's not just usable, but let's think about the whole thing.
Yeah, and
it need to be, in this world.
And it's a balance, and I think it is a balance, and I think part of what we're seeing in the challenge that the field is facing today, is that we've kind of lost that balance. Is that I talk to a lot of VCs and product managers and so on and so forth, and they're going like, I don't see the value in what they're doing, and we've done a lot of silly, as a field and have completely lost that connect to the bottom line. But again, I always quickly follow up and say, well, we have to do it in an ethical, responsible way. So balance. That's the secret to our success individually and as a profession. And I think we've lost that the last decade.
All right. All right. Let's move on. I know it's hard sometimes to summarize, but what would you consider as your greatest achievement in teaching?
Hmm. I really do believe, and if this is not, again, if I'm focusing on content rather than the delivery, but I think getting people excited, and I don't want to say, I figured out a magic way of doing this. I have,
Yeah.
I haven't a clue as to why this might work when it works, but I think people do find it hard, and I think they find it extremely challenging. But at the end of the day, I think they love it. So making people passionate about this difficult material is that, we're in a field, and again, and I often grapple with when I was using the word profession before, and this may be another episode of this series, but I'm not sure we are a profession. We don't behave like a profession. Every profession has some, whether it be, theoretical or ideological, but it has some kind of foundation. And I'll be honest here, I participated, this was back to UPA, but,
Yeah.
and ISO and things like that, where we tried to come up with common bodies of knowledge for this field, and
Right.
every one of them failed.
Right.
And I'm going like, okay, if we can't agree on what we are, then we're not a profession. So, again, I stray a little bit there, but it ties into is getting people excited about the fact, because I think, a lot of people come into the, the program saying, oh, I'm going to learn how to do an interview. I'm going to learn how to do an observational study. Going to learn how to do a, an A/B test, or, this kind of quantitative analysis. And then they realize that, okay, all of that is meaningless without deeply understanding, the human, behind all of that. That's behind the numbers, that's behind the observation, that's behind the answer that they shared, is understanding those people, deeply. So I would say that's the greatest accomplishment, is the ability to get people excited about that. And and it is funny, like, at the reunion, back in June, is like that people remember these little tiny little pieces
Right.
from the class literally 20 years later, 25
Right.
years later. And and I think you all know the little stories that I would tell, and it's there. It's implanted. And it's not just a silly story. They realize, the story about cloth napkins and paper napkins, which, I hear from people a lot, 20 years later. They realize that there are artifacts in the experience that will trigger different networks in the mind, and then produce a different response. So they remember that story, but they connect it to a very, complex, psychological, principle. And getting people to remember that, I never expect people to remember everything, but I think anybody that came out of this program could pick up, any challenging book in psychology or, physiology, even neuroscience more in recent years, as I brought more neuroscience into 700. And, going back to something you asked earlier, I think that's one of the changes, because the product world that we live in today is much more multimodal. So
Right.
every year I have to bring more of the auditory system and the touch system, as we're talking about wearable technology and different means of interaction through gesture and touch and so on and so forth. All of that has changed, but I think anybody that comes out of this program is going to be able to pick up a book in those areas or go into a class in those areas and feel quite comfortable. And I think we see this in the graduates. You think about, the folks that you graduated with, and even, the ones that came out a few years later. Those folks came out and they were working in a world of software on a disk that would go into a box that would be, shrink wrap. And you look at those folks today, and they're now working in a world of, the cloud and AI and multimodal design, and they've made that transition. And I would hope the experience they had in the program and in some of the classes that I taught, I hope contributed to that. Is that, again, a lot of the things that we're thinking about as we're teaching is not, it is to help you in the here and now and to make you successful in the here and now, but also to prepare you for what's coming down the road that we can't even begin to imagine today. And I think we've done that quite well. I can't think of anybody that's come out of this program who's obsolete, who said, I can't get a job because I haven't been able to adjust to this change or that change.
Yeah, I can testify about myself. I became very interested in, I call them products you are not spending time with, but spending time in.
Yep, exactly.
And I worked at WeWork, so everything really applies. So you're really ready after the program. You're really ready for any type of I call them products, but it's not just product experience.
Yeah, and again, I feel at this point in my life I've come really full circle. And it's everybody in the program that teaches in the program. And credit to our students is that they get it. They get it. I mean, I could see them saying, okay, I want to come into a program where that all you focus on is mobile applications, because that's where 85% of the jobs are. I don't see students asking for that. The concept, that I share and I kind of frame it with now. It's about the design of everything. And I know I'm stealing that a little bit from Donald Norman, and I've talked to Donald about this. I credit him. I'm saying, like, back in the 80s when I first read the psychology of everyday things, and it was called the psychology of everyday things at the time. I'm going, like, I just came out of my PhD program in psychology, and I was trained as a designer, and I'm going, like, this just made sense. I mean, that was my journey for 4 or 5 years leading up to this, that I was doing it on my own. And when I saw that book, it clicked. And again, we've done this in the program where we talk about service design. We talk about the design of place. And the students get it. They don't sit there scratching their heads and say, crazy old man, what are you talking about? They get it. And as they apply this thinking to more things and more diverse areas, like, again, like place and service and so on and so forth, it deepens that expertise. It's part of that building, because part of expertise is that nimble, being nimble, and being able to walk in and wrap your head around any product that is any problem that is thrown at you. And I think our students are quite capable of doing that.
Yep. All right, we're close to wrapping this up. Last question, probably a big one. What legacy do you hope to leave to your students with and the Bentley program?
Yeah, I think it's a passion for studying the user. It's always frustrated me that we've been in a field that we call user experience, where practitioners don't understand the user. So again, I hope, and if I was staying on, I've shared this with Janelle and others. I said, if I was staying on for another 10 years at this moment in time in the profession, what would I do? I'd double down on the human factors, because I think this is, again, what will distinguish us and separate us from the rest of the folks out there. So again, it's that passion, that lifelong passion of studying people. Let's not call them users, but just studying people in every way, shape, and form. Children, the elderly, the neurodivergent, those with physical challenges, culturally looking at how different people in the world experience things in life differently. But hopefully sharing that passion, and hopefully some of that passion rubs off on my students. And if that's happened, I'm a very, very happy, fulfilled man.
All right, very good, very good. All right, thank you for joining us for our monthly interview series, Conversations with Bill. Stay tuned as each HFID board member has the privilege to continue these conversations with Bill each month for the next year, exploring various topics and capturing his invaluable legacy. We will be sharing each monthly interview on the last day of the month, and with the next interview scheduled to be posted on October 1st on our private LinkedIn Bentley University HFID page. Thank you so much, Bill. Appreciate it.